Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I hate to interrupt the conversations, but we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our second Coffee and Community. This is a partnership with the League of Women Voters. And the Coffee and Community is really about educating and informing our citizens, our community, about really important issues. As you know, today we're going to talk about enrollment and funding in public education. If we haven't met yet, I'm Jackie Bubaltz, president of the Detroit Lakes Regional Chamber of Commerce. How we do the Coffee and Community is that we have worked with our panelists to come up with some pre-questions and given them those questions so they can be better prepared. So there's some slides that will show you some of the information that we're going to go through. This is a complicated topic, and we're going to try to work through it with our panel of experts. We won't have time for Q&A, but certainly if you have a question, you could see one of the panelists after we're done with our questions for them. We want to thank our sponsors today. We have Zerberg Architects. Thank you, Brian Blake. Okay. Thank you for helping us put this on. We also want to thank KDLM and the museum for allowing us to be here this morning, and also Fundamental Technologies, who helped us with our sound, technical things, and also videotaping. So we're going to be able to put this on the Chamber's YouTube channel. And so if you have someone that you thought was going to be here, missed it, please have them go to our YouTube channel and they can see the recording. So our panelists this morning, we have Mark Jensen, superintendent. We have Renee Kurzman, who's the director of curriculum, instruction, and technology. I don't think you can add one more thing on that. We could, yeah, right. Yeah, I'm sure you probably could. I was on the school board several years ago, and I got to know Renee. She has so much expertise and passion about what she does, so I really appreciate that. Jason is the Director of Finance and Operations. Jason also happens to serve on our Chamber Board, which we're really appreciative of his expertise when it comes to the finances of the Chamber. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our questions. I'm going to get the mics ready, and I'm going to give this to you so you can go through the slides you want to go through. And I'm just going to share that one. Go ahead and turn it on. All right, are we good? We're good, Kevin? All right. Okay, so let's just start out with a really easy question. Go ahead and introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit more about you, your background, how many years you've been at this, and so that our community can get to know you a little bit better.
I guess I'll start. Good morning, everybody. Like Jackie said, Mark Jensen, I am the superintendent here. Renee and I actually graduated high school the same year, so we're trying to figure out how long we've been at this. 36 years, I think, in public education. I am an English teacher by trade. I was an English teacher for probably 12, 13 years, and then found that leadership stuff just kind of gravitated towards me, and I have since apologized to my high school principal in Moorhead, because he's just like, you got to get out of here. You need to be in the leadership role, because I was just driving him crazy. And so I ended up being an assistant principal, and then a high school principal, and then they added the middle school to me when I was at Ricori. I was at Ricori for 13 years. And then my parents have a lake home, Big Sugarbush Lake, and so they got to a point where they needed to move to more of an assisted living thing, and so we bought it, and it just worked out. This job opened up, and I am just absolutely blessed that I get to live on a lake and go to work every day just an amazing, and those of you that have heard me speak publicly know that Detroit Lakes is a unique town, and just if you get out and see other areas and stuff like that, in terms of education, in terms of Laker pride, that's a real thing. I mean, that's a real thing here, and it's just a joy to work in this community, and like I said, I'm very lucky.
Jason? Oh, Renee? Okay. Yep. Hi. There we go.
As Mark said, I've been doing this for a while too in public education. I've worked as elementary teacher, and then I was in higher ed for a while, and then I was principal at Roosevelt here, and then I've been in this role for about 11 years. So I've been working in Detroit Lakes for probably about 15 years, and our family moved here in 2000. So I have 3 Laker alum. So that was wonderful. They had a great experience here. So it's been an honor to serve the Detroit Lakes Public Schools in that way, because I've seen firsthand what it does. So right now, as it pertains to today's discussion, I do help lead the curriculum instruction and technology. I have a great team though, so like they do a lot of it, but I'm just very fortunate to have a team to work with that's so supportive. But I oversee federal programs and also American Indian programs and some other state funding sources.
Good morning, Jason Keene. This is 23rd year in education, so a rookie compared to these guys. But prior to Detroit Lakes, I served in 2 other districts, starting as an elementary teacher, and then I became an elementary school administrator, and then started here in Detroit Lakes 11 years ago as the principal at Rossman for 6 years, and then have been in this position as the director of finance and operation for the last 5 years. And so obviously the finance side is probably what's speaking to today. Also oversee kind of the operations side, so buildings and grounds, transportation, and food service. And similar to Renee, lots of great teammates that help support in those roles.
Thank you. We're going to kind of start with some big picture questions and get down to more specific as we go along. But first of all, we want to really understand how a school district overall sort of runs. So if one of you could explain the roles and responsibilities of the school board, the superintendent, administration, principals, and teacher, how does everybody work together, and then how are decisions made? Sometimes difficult decisions, but how do those roles then work together?
Sure. On your table, you'll see I'll be referencing this quite a bit here. It's our org chart for Detroit Lakes. And we're a mid to large size district, and so smaller districts like Lake Park and Frazee and stuff probably don't have the levels that we do. But just kind of go through the role. Obviously, the top is the school board. They are elected for 4 years. They are a public board. We meet once a month, and that group really is in charge of one person, and that's me. So I have 6 bosses that I navigate, and I use that term loosely, that I navigate and try to manage, and so on. Their role as a school board is policy and governance. They fly at that 10,000 feet. And we try, and that's the difficult part for my job, is to make sure that they're not flying low. Like, we need to change that English teacher, or we have people that are in place to do those things. And for the most part, it's pretty, they understand that and stuff. And I think a lot of people, the thing about education is the one area that everybody's an expert, because we all went to school. And so we all think we know what things are like in a classroom and what they should be like. And so that's always an interesting thing to navigate. The next row down then is me, the superintendent, and that in a business model, it's like the CEO. And again, I then have to kind of make sure that the things below me are going, and then the things above me are going. And I have a team, and that breaks down to that next level where you have those administrators. So we have, I would call it like my cabinet. And we meet weekly and go through all the things that are going on in those areas, as well as everything that's going on in the district. And so you have human resources. So that's Kylie Johnson. She handles all the hirings, the firings, the paid leaves, payroll, all of those things kind of in that world. And then again, like I said, weekly, then she'll come say, all right, Mark, here's what I've been working on this week. Here's what you need to be aware of. We might be having some trouble with a custodian in some building or whatever. And so she kind of handles that area. And then you have, obviously, Jason. I'm not going to go too far into it because he can explain more, but he does the business and operations. So there's two sides to his job. He has the finance side, which is handling all the money and what's going in and what's going out. And then he also has the operations side. So that's like buildings and maintenance and custodial. And then on top of that, he also has transportation. And so he works through those kinds of things and oversees and manages. And then all of us kind of have another level underneath us to kind of keep those things going. And then we just basically, we monitor and make sure things are happening. Renee, again, she does all the teaching and learning. She has a big job, actually. She's got federal programming, which is our federal dollars and our federal programs like Title and Achievement and Integration, the American Indian, all of that stuff kind of comes underneath her, as well as technology. She works closely with teachers and building principals and making sure that curriculum is being done in the manner that we want it to be done, and that we're having high rigor, high standards, all of those kinds of things. And that's, like I said, she's got a pretty big job in terms of making sure that everything in the buildings are going well. And then the last person of mine is Karen Nudell. She's special education. And so she handles all of the federal and state special education. So all of the programming in terms of staffing, IEPs, and it's very, very, they look at it very closely in terms of making sure that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, both at the federal and state level, and that you're spending your money, because we are reimbursed, not fully, but we are reimbursed for our special education. So I get a question every once in a while, this is a good one for this group. Boy, Detroit Lakes has a lot of SUVs running around. Yep, we do. We spend our special education dollars on buying an SUV because we found out that it's cheaper for us to have one of our employees drive a special ed kid to work or some event rather than having a bus. You're paying way more for a bus to put two kids on a bus and drive them around. And so it's a cost-effective way of doing business. We just found that this is way cheaper. We're actually saving money on that. Okay, and then that's the upper level. Now you go into the building principals. And I'm in charge of all the building principals. Those are my people that I work with. I hire. I make sure that things are happening in their buildings. There's that level of accountability. And then you can look at their org chart. They're then in charge of a lot of things within their building. And I'm pretty hands off in terms of how you want to run your building until I can't be hands off, and then I get in and I have to intervene and say, okay, we maybe need to do some things a little bit different. And then the last group is teachers. They're the boots on the ground. They're working with the kids, and the principals then monitor those people in terms of what's taking place in the classroom. So for the accountability question, obviously I'm accountable to the school board. I'm evaluated once a year. Got one coming up in February already, and it's making sure that our strategic plan, which we're currently working on right now for the next 5 years, is being that we're meeting it, that we're making progress, we're making gains, and so on, and making sure that the district is financially stable, staffing stable. All of those things kind of fall under my purview in terms of that I'm accountable to the school board for. And then likewise, the school board is held accountable by you. And that is an election, and we have one coming up in the fall. If I truly encourage you, if you are at all contemplating, should I try something like that? Please do. I think it's really important that we get unique voices across the community on our school board, and it makes us a much more effective board and district. And then administrators and principals, they're under me. So I have, my cabinet is under me, and then as well as principals, and then obviously teachers are under their principals. So how are difficult decisions made? We have a team. Obviously, it's great, it's great, but the buck stops with me. I mean, it's Mark Jensen's decision. And I'll give anybody $5, if you've heard me before. What do you think my most stressful decision I have to make? Snow day. I kid you not, you guys. I lose sleep for 2 days knowing that there's a storm coming. And then just to walk you through the process, just so you know, it's at 4:30 we're up. Jason's driving south. We've got another person driving north. We're in touch with the county. We're out. It's not something that I sit up and go, let's go 2 hours late today, or let's go. Ultimately, canceling school is really a difficult decision because you have a lot of families that's their meal. That the kids' meal is coming. And so it weighs heavy. And what happens up at Strawberry Lake, up by where I live, and what happens down at the south end of our district are two sometimes very different weather patterns. And so it's a lose-lose. I just know I've come to grow used to it, that whatever decision I make, somebody's going to be mad. And I did. The last two ones, I've had some nasty emails coming my way. So I get it. But ultimately, like I said, there's a team. I weigh heavily on my team. And that's my cabinet, and that's my principals. And we meet, like I said, my cabinet meets once a week. Our principals meet twice a month. And it really is we have some budget stuff coming up, which Jason will probably get into a little bit, but we're going to have to make some tough decisions. And ultimately, yes, it's my decision, but I seek input all the time. And I want to make the best decision. I want to make the most informed decision I can, and I can't do that. And I've been able to now 6 years. I've been able to hire some people, and the people that have stayed have we really found our groove. And I feel really confident, and I feel good about coming to work every day and knowing that I have a team to work with. I think that's it. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Yellow card.
And we'll try really hard to explain acronyms, because there's a lot of acronyms. So you had mentioned an IEP. So an IEP is an individual education plan when you have special education services. So I'll try to point those out from time to time, but also you could also ask what that acronym stands for. Once you work in the business, you just spew those out, easily and readily. So, okay, so let's get into some a little bit more specific. What the question is, what does it cost on average to educate one student per year in our district, and what's all included in that cost, and then how does that compare to the funding received? And I think you'll talk us through there's typically a gap.
Yes. I'm just going to share one quick thing, because a lot of times it's probably just some basic information that we share at the district level and with the public is, we have funds that come to us and have to go in certain buckets. And when they're in those buckets, they're pretty restricted in terms of their use, and a lot of times they can't get shared. And our four main buckets of funding that we refer to are our general fund, which is about 80% of our budget, and that's just our basic operating, so educating kids and keeping buildings operated and so forth. We also have a food service fund, so revenues generated from food service that can only be spent on food service expenditures primarily, and then community service, or things, if you're familiar with community education, adult basic education, school readiness, or early childhood family education. Those programmings have their own separate funding and expenses that can only really be used for those, and then debt service, and that's related to anything that's revenue generated from public support, so going out for levies or referendums where bond measures are passed, and then the tax revenues that come in can only then be spent on bond and interest payments. So again, kind of just a basic overview of our funding sources. We're going to primarily stick and talk to the general fund again, because that's about 80% of our overall budget and expenditures. And so you'll see, and this information is in front of you as well, and this information is dating back to the 23-24 school year, primarily because at the close of each year, we close out and have an audit at the end of each year that typically has to be finalized by just before December 1st. Well, even after that finalization, we still have final tallies and revenues from the previous year still coming in throughout the next fiscal year. But if you look back, and this kind of shares, and we share this at our Truth and Taxation hearing as well, as you'll see, it takes about $15,000 per student when you take into account that cost. And then typically we try to pass a balanced budget each year. Some years that's a little more challenging than others, and you can see that the revenues and expenditures, typically are pretty close to lining, and that's kind of the case with most school districts. You can see where we compare to some of our area districts there as well. When you start breaking down, I think one of the next pieces of it is what makes up those expenses, okay? And so we'll kind of hit on pieces. Obviously, first and foremost, it's instruction. So you think of, what we classify as regular instruction, primary instruction that students are receiving, K through 12. You have vocational education instruction that has its own separate revenues and expenses. Special education is one that we often refer to and discuss. And then, and then you start building into all the other things that it takes to operate a school. So you have your support services, both at the instructional level. So you're thinking your academic interventionists, and then you also have your student support services. So things like counselors, and then you start breaking down to sites and buildings. So, obviously I oversee the operations side. So more so not just the custodial part, but also, in taking into account their, building and construction needs as well that are going on. And then the other piece, probably that I didn't include, but that goes into the pupil support services, that gets included in that is transportation. We're probably unique in comparison to majority of the districts. We contract out about 95% of our transportation, and that's been our historical practice. And so obviously if you are contracting out, you're providing that support service and that cost goes there. If we were to operate ourselves, it probably all would just shift into salaries, benefits, and then capital expenditures as well. So and then you have your district support services, so the district level administration and supports it takes to operate, as well as the building level administration. So kind of a good breakdown. And then if we drill down even more, we're a human capital business. Our staff is going to occupy, between the salaries and wages and benefits, about 80% of our overall budget. And then you include in their purchase services, which I again highlight, primarily is going to be a lot of the transportation services. That's about 75% of our purchase services budget. And then you start drilling down even more into supplies and materials, and then capital expenditures as well. And so, and I think, did I hit all of it in terms of that?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, and the next we were going to talk about where does the funding come from? So these are the expenses. You're talking about it, but where do you have more specifically, like where these funds come from?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. So just to give you a quick snapshot of our overall revenues, our current year budget, which we're working through revisions that would be presented to the board, we're a little more unique than the city and the county. Our budget, our fiscal year runs July 1 through June 30th. And so where city and county are typically on the calendar year schedule. So we're kind of right smack dab in the middle of our fiscal year. And so we pass a budget, at the June board meeting for the upcoming school year, required by statute, and then districts are required at some point within their fiscal year to make a revised budget. Obviously at the beginning of June, you're making a lot of assumptions throughout a whole school year. What's staffing going to look like? What's enrollment going to look like? And so forth. And now, we have a pretty good grasp of what those things are going to take, as we go through a revised budget. So you can see the kind of the breakdown of where the revenues are, but where do they come from is probably a better question. And you can see about 80% of all of our revenues. I'm going to focus primarily on the general fund at this point, but 80% of our revenues come from the state of Minnesota, and we have a per pupil amount that is given based so strictly on enrollment. So that's why you always kind of hear us talking about, enrollment is very key. And so watching the birth rates, watching the kindergarten enrollment, and then as it progresses, through the K through 12. And kids are weighted a little differently as they progress through. Students that are 7th through 12th grade are weighted a little more heavily because they tend to have more expenses that go along with them. You think of, when you get into middle school and high school, they have opportunities for electives, extracurricular activities. So it takes a little bit more to educate students of those age as opposed to maybe a kindergarten through 6th grade student. So again, a majority of that 80%, or of that state revenue, about 60 to 70% of it comes from the general education formula, and then you have a fair amount of other, different types of categorical revenue that come from the state. So things like special education. Renee talked about programming that she oversees, like the American Indian Education Department or the integration. And so we have a variety of revenues that come, in that regards. And then the next biggest bucket is going to be your local, and primarily that's funds generated through our levy. And we are probably unique in comparison to most districts in the state of Minnesota. We're probably in about the 20% group that does not have an operating levy that has been passed by our community. We haven't brought one historically. and that's probably primarily related to the tax base of Detroit Lakes in regards to that. But there are many complicated formulas that go into your levy, and more than welcome you to come and attend our annual Truth and Taxation. I mean, if you want me to drill down more on that, it's really exciting.
The first time we had somebody.
Yeah. But again, I mean, there's a fair amount of limits that are set by the state that, again, is based off of property value, property tax classification, and so forth, but then helps to provide. And there also, each year, is kind of a little bit of equalization. So if you tend to see a shift in the amount of revenue generated at the local level levy, you're probably going to see a downward shift in then what's provided to you at the state level. And so there's always kind of that factor. When you look at the other local revenue sources, these are your things of you're attending an activities event, or you pay admissions, or your child participates in an activity, local tuitions that are paid in those regards. And then obviously the federal portion, you can see, it's just shy of 4% of our overall budget. And, a majority of this is made up probably in two main categories. We have our title funding, so we have resources related to Title I, Title II, Title IV, and it's probably, and I'll maybe turn to Renee in a little bit to describe that. And then another chunk of it comes for federal special education funding as well. And so year over year, we've seen a slower decrease in the amount of funds related to those federal funds. Again, it's taking into account a lot of things, both at the regional, state, and then, national level that impacts those fundings. And then you have kind of a couple of just miscellaneous other funds that kind of go apart into that.
I think this is really helpful because as things were happening at the federal level, I think there was a lot of questions. How is that going to impact us locally? And it's really a pretty small percentage overall.
Yeah, and it's shifted probably primarily since the COVID funding expired. For about a 3-4 year wave there, we had a significant amount of one-time funds, and not just us, but all districts. That allowed us, to honestly to kind of keep afloat during that phase and keep programming at levels, especially when we saw, a significant dip in enrollment for students who were electing other options or just moved to other locations.
Yeah.
Renee, I don't want to pick any, but maybe walk through what is your world like in terms of the federal funding? I mean, what do they need from you? What do you have to do? What do you have to?
Yeah, sure. Our title funding has 3 different categories that we work with, and Title I is a category that we have the most funds coming in, and that provides support services like interventionists and some paraprofessionals in our schools that need it the most. And there's there's a formula that we decide where that funding goes, so we distribute that each year. Title II fundings, that's a smaller bucket, but that money is used for professional development. So currently it helps us pay for some of our instructional coaches who are embedded in the classrooms. So they go and support teachers within the classrooms. And then Title IV is more for innovative programs. So currently we're using that to do some curriculum writing and learning about hybrid teaching and online teaching. And so that's where those funds are used. But in addition, there's some money that we can use, and we get to choose kind of how the categories are used, the allotments, and Jason and I work together on that. But we also have McKinney-Vento funding, and that's funding for our children that are unhoused or homeless. Both terms are used, but that funding, we have a social worker in our district that part of her job is solely to focus on supporting those kids and families, and surprisingly there's a lot for her to do in this town. And but we have something called the Laker Cupboard in our district that's not part of that funding. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that our community, it's all been donation based, and our community has supported it, and that is used for kids that may be unhoused, but any student that has some needs. And it has everything from food to clothing. But we are so fortunate to have this district social worker who, she gets in touch with families, or if the counselors tell her something is happening with a kid, she may go talk to the child or call the family and give additional support. And we do a lot more than people may know in our district. We have our limits, but the other thing that she's been fantastic at because of her social work background is she's really making a lot of community connections for families, because we obviously as a school district can't give the family all the support they need, but she's been fantastic at connecting them with our community connections and social services, churches, different organizations. So
Thank you for that. I asked Jason to talk about levies and bonding because I think it can be confusing. So thank you for this slide, and I'll have you walk us through it here.
Yeah, and this is a slide that's pretty familiar. We work with a financial advisor, Ellers, to help support us, and this is a slide that they use regularly. But, pretty simple slang here, that levies are for learning, bonds are for building. And so all of these options, and school districts have, some smaller amounts that they can look at bonding for or levying for without voter approval, but primarily these ones are going to require voter approval. And so if you're familiar, in 2018, we passed a building bond referendum project that helped to do some additions and renovations at all of our sites. But kind of just turning to the levy side, there are two main that you can see there, operating referendum, and so that's just a per pupil amount. So districts can go out and request, an increase in funding per pupil, depending, upon that child or that child count amount, specifically used for operating costs, so salaries, benefits, day-to-day operating costs. You can also request to go out for approval for capital project levies, and this is a little more restrictive. Primarily, we talk in terms of these might be referred to as technology levies, maybe that districts use them to support technology needs or for capital improvements. So also purchasing curriculum, Renee can attest to that. The costs of curriculum have skyrocketed probably in the last 10 years. And then also you could use it for unique special projects. When you slide over to the bond side, again, that's pretty straightforward, right? You're getting voter approval to do specific bonded projects that are spread over a longer term. And again, these aren't like, hey, we're requesting $30 million, we'll figure out what to do with it later and kind of go along. I mean, you have to provide, and provide evidence of what you're going to be doing specific so that, that the voters can trust and there's transparency for what those projects are related to. But again, all of these are, dependent upon voter approval. We can't just say all of a sudden we're going to add $200 per pupil to the tax base. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's really important for the community to understand the complexity of the revenue and the expenditures, which you did a really good job of summarizing it into a chart, but it's complicated, obviously. So let's switch over to talking about enrollment trends and what we're seeing locally. What factors do we think might be driving them, and then ultimately how does that impact funding?
Sure. Well, like I said, weather is my big stressor. Enrollment is my other one. Like Jason said, roughly, again, this is kind of a ballpark, but about $15,000 per kid. So when kids aren't in our buildings, that's money or revenue that's not coming in. And and this is not just a Detroit Lakes issue, this is actually a state issue. I was able to listen to the state demographer last year. Minnesota as a state isn't necessarily growing. And there's a lot of factors to it. There's not a lot of migration into our state. There's not a lot of births taking place. I have a millennial child, and I'm on him all the time. When are you going to start? Help us out here. And the millennials and Gen Zs, they don't want kids. They want experiences. They want to travel, and they're like he says, I'm not falling for that scam like you guys did. I'm not. It's a racket, and that's just the mentality. And so we're having less kids in the state being born, and that all impacts us. So we monitor it very closely. Our kindergarten class this year is probably one of the lowest classes we've had in like the last 15, 20 years almost. And that's disturbing. So as you have lower numbers going in and bigger numbers leaving, that poses a problem, and that's that's money. I don't think this way, but it's a great analogy to example, because I had an old superintendent that said it, and I got in trouble one time for saying this, but because he always said, Mark, just imagine that kid who's got a backpack full of money on his back. And they're walking out the door, and I'm like, well, gee, that's not why we're here. But it's a good analogy, is that's money that leaves your district, and so you've got to deal with that. You've got to kind of like, how do I manage that? Because I don't want to lose teachers. Jason said that's 80% of our budget is staff, and if 80% of our enrollment's going, we've got to look at reductions in staff. We just don't need the people or the manpower that we have. And so it's really a difficult thing. I think to understand the other complexity to this is high school. Kids in 7 through 12 really have a absolute smorgasbord of options besides coming to school. The online stuff since COVID has exploded. And so if a kid is going to attend Minnesota Connections, which is an online school, obviously the revenue is going to Minnesota Connections and not us. And we have, right now, currently we have 160 kids full-time online. Thankfully, when I got here, we started our own online program, eLaker, and that has absolutely saved us because those kids are choosing us to stay with us for that education. Now, personally, I'm not a fan of online education. I can't stand it. But it's the world I live in, and it's the world that I've got to make sure that fiscally we're able to negotiate that and give kids opportunities, because if they're not going to choose us, they're going to choose somewhere else. We also have a lot of students that do one class. I'm going to take 2 classes at the high school, and I'm going to try 1 online, which is fine as long as it's through us, And so again, and then how do I staff that? What does that look like? Because obviously about 160 kids out of the high school right now that are virtual, there's 160 kids less in classrooms. And then how do I staff that? And how do I staff the online? And so we've really been working with our teachers right now in terms of how does that look? Maybe you have 2 classes in person and you take care of the English online for those 70 kids or whatever. And it's a very different experience. Online schooling is very different than what you get in the classroom. And I think, if you go to college, a lot of your classes are online too. I mean, that's just the way it is right now. And I think people kids are starting to sense that. And a lot of kids are busy. A lot of kids want to work. A lot of kids are competing in athletics and stuff like that. Or they love the flexibility. They love going, I want to do my school between 2 and 5 instead of getting up at 8 o'clock. And that is that, and they can. And so as a district, we're doing everything we can to make sure that we can capture those students and keep them with us, because that saves staff and so on. The other thing, not on enrollment, but and Jason had mentioned, another thing people don't necessarily understand. Really already? Okay, they really don't understand is certain pockets of money can be used for that. So like food service, I can't use food service money to pay for a paraprofessional. It only can be used for the kitchen. And a lot of people don't understand that because they're called restricted funds, and they keep that they're very closely monitored. And that's one of the things legislatively we were trying to ask for last year was, can you loosen that up a little bit, because that would help save us some areas in other areas. And then finally, the last thing, what do you think the problem is? First, kids aren't being born. Second, housing. Housing is an issue in this town. Detroit Lakes is a very expensive community to get a house and live in. And so I think that has really kind of impeded some of our families from moving here and maybe going to a Lake Park or a Holly or a Frazee, where they get maybe a little better bang for their dollar.
And do you, this is a quick question, as far as the students can open enroll within our district, they can open enroll out of our district and in. But we do have students that open enroll into our district as well, correct?
Yeah, we're actually net positive for every district. Like the kids that go to Lake Park versus the kids from Lake Park coming here, we're positive. Like we get more coming in, except for Waub and Ogama. It would be the one district that we're not net positive to.
Okay, great. When resources are limited, how does the district prioritize what services, what programs, what to adjust, what to delay? Where do you how do you focus those dollars in the right pockets when they're obviously limited?
Well, obviously administrators.
Yeah.
We're gonna go, right?
Right.
No, I'm kidding. It's all about kids and programming. You know, how can you preserve that as much as possible? So you look at other areas in terms of what do we really need 2 people watching the lunch? Can we do it with 1? Can we do this? You know, so things that don't, we try to keep it as far out of the classroom as possible. Obviously, you're going to get to a point where that's just not going to work. You're going to have to do some of those things. But it really, and it's a team effort, you know. We've all, you know, like you look at our district office, we've probably have downsized by 5 people that we've just not replaced. They've retired, and we've just added more to our plates. And that's fine. That's just kind of what you have to do. And so you kind of look at those levels. You know, if you look at the org chart, those higher levels, where can I take something out of there, you know, that's not going to impact the classrooms? And again, that's just not necessarily my decision. We've started. We have meetings tomorrow and Friday, I believe, with building principals. Like, all right, this is coming. We are going to have some cost containments, just because, like I said, our enrollment's down and costs are up. I think Jason said our maintenance costs are 30% higher this year. Just maintenance, like electrical and all that stuff, are higher, 30% higher than they were last year at this time. I mean, that's everybody. I mean, we all know it. We're all living it. But that we're on a, you know, in our scale at the school, that's where it comes. And so whatever we can do to minimize classrooms impact, that's what we do. And we try to find as many creative solutions as possible to minimize the piece.
Jason, do you have other things you wanted to add to the complexity here of school funding?
That can maybe, do you have one last? Maybe they might tie more to the question, the next question. Well, I think just probably, as Mark touched on too, is that as enrollment changes, you know, that impacts things on the operational side too. Like, it would be nice to be able to say, like, oh, we could just cut transportation, or we could cut some food service or operations, but our building sizes aren't changing, our bus routes aren't changing. We still have requirements for all of those areas as well that we need to take. And so again, it's trying to minimize the impact. Where can we do more with less ultimately?
And Renee, on the curriculum side of things, are there some things that are, I'm assuming, mandated, like those things you don't have a lot of flexibility? So, you know, is there flexibility in curriculum as you think about, again, how it impacts funding and?
Yes, I mean, as the state does mandate some things that we have to do, so every 10 years it's new standards. So then oftentimes we have a material selection committee that works on that cycle. And some are more expensive than others, but like right now we're looking at kindergarten through 5th grade new language arts materials. There's something called the READ Act in Minnesota, and so they require us to do that. They required new assessments that cost us money too. And so those things we can't do without. They've also, for the first time, shared which curriculum resources they'd like us to look at, and we still have a choice, and we're still going through that process. But just for a reference, the estimates are coming in, just K-5, over $400,000. So that's just for K-5 reading. And so you start thinking about all these subject areas. So since my time here, there has been where we've been in cost containments, we're like, can we spread that out for one more year? So we just skip a cycle to save money. We typically don't have a $400,000 budget for that, but that's what we are requesting for this, but we probably won't get that. So then the teachers go through and we cut. What's the bare minimum of that? What can we get by with? And so we do that quite frequently. And then technology too, that's another area where we ensure certain age groups have the updated Chromebooks and things like that. But our primary, I would say, you know, we don't want screens in our hands of our kids so much, but during COVID, everybody had to have a screen. And so as we're thinking about budget cuts, we think about who needs those first type of things. So yeah, so with curriculum, yeah, that's definitely something we push off, and but we try to make sure that the teachers have what they need and the kids have what they need. And some subjects you can get by without changing right away, but some you must change. So
okay, thank you for that. I've got 2 more questions. What are the biggest challenges and opportunities that you see ahead?
You've talked a lot, so, I mean, I think probably, yeah, give you a break. I mean, I think just to reiterate, probably the grades 7 through 12, and, knowing, trying to plan and prepare from that across all, components of what it takes to basically for a child to be successful at school. And so I think we feel right now we're always 6 months to 12 months behind on what that next year and trying to budget for that is. And I probably, this is my world I live in all the time, but, we keep seeing that, we want to be able to be competitive and retain staff and recruit staff. And so that's wages and benefits, and so as less kids are coming in and, we want to be able to be more competitive in that area, there's ultimately, there's a crossing point that we're getting to, and, we keep discussing every year, we've been in cost containments now for the last 3 years and probably a little over $2 million over the last 3 years, and looking at it again and only seeing probably, we use the word bleaker and bleaker future, but, we're very dependent upon what's happening at the state level in terms of that. And so we're going to watch with close eyes, but everyone also sees, the things that are happening, at the state level right now, and where that fits. And so a lot of uncertainty in that area. And I think that probably is weighing heavily on some of the decisions that we might make in the future.
Renee, would you add anything to challenges and opportunities?
I would say the challenges and an opportunity is kind of reiterating what Mark said. Our high school is changing the experience for students. So like Mark said, we started our E-Laker, but one thing we're committed to is making our E-Laker opportunities for our kids to be excellent and a choice that kids make and we feel good about, so that it's not just letting the easy way, out. So we want to do that, and we've made some shifts this year to make sure that our kids are supported more if they choose that. So I think that's a good option. Another challenge is, frankly, the colleges you mentioned, the universities are going online. So PSEO, which is post-secondary education opportunities, our students can do that, and that's great for them, but that hurts our enrollment because technically then they're the university student, and you probably can talk about the nuances of all the funding with that, but I think that whole piece is a challenge and an opportunity. And then in addition, I think student supports in general, teachers can only do so much, but we always want more counselors, more this, more that, and that's difficult. But then you also have the mandates on us, like you have to use this assessment, and they might charge $10 a student for that. So those are things out of our control. So then again, we have to really work as a team to figure out where can we cut, what can we do, and what can we add to our plates so that we don't have to have it touch the classrooms. So.
Thank you for that. So last question, what can the community do to support our school district and the important work that you do with our kids?
I think, like I said earlier, this community, I've been a part of several communities in my world of my life of education, and this is unique and it's great, and I think keep doing what we're doing in terms of that. Our academy model, our advisories, our family nights at the elementaries are incredibly well attended, and people are really supportive of what we're doing here. And I'm incredibly proud of the people that work here and what they do. I think also, too, is stuff like this. Oftentimes, I said, education is the one thing that everybody's an expert in. But I think it's great that people, you're coming to something like this, you're learning more. There's a lot more to education than maybe your fourth grade teacher as you were growing up, or those kinds of things. And that's good, because you need to be aware. All three of us here are incredibly transparent people. If you want to know something, I have an open door policy. I answer my phone, I answer emails and stuff like that. If you have questions, if you have concerns, please, by all means, reach out. We're here, and I think the more open our communications are between community and schools, the better. And I think we're all here for one thing. We want our kids and we want our community to be productive, to be vibrant, and so on. And I think that's part of it, where we have to work together and be communicating with each other as much as possible.
Thank you. Jason or Renee, would you add anything to that? Okay. Well, thank you.
He said it all.
Yeah, yeah.
Have more kids. How about that?
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Looking at the room, I'm not sure this is the right room to ask that question, but thank you so much. Thank you for your leadership, your transparency, your commitment to quality education in our community. It is, as you said, it's vital and very, very important. So can you help me thank our panelists this morning? Can you advance the slide for me? I just want to also, if you could advance the slide to, I just want to make sure, there's a few, yeah, sorry.
You tell me where to.
Keep going, you'll see it. I just wanted to make sure we thank again our Zerberg for sponsoring this morning, KDLM, the museum, and Fundamental Technologies. Thank you all for coming. We are planning our next Coffee and Community for, I think, April, May, something like that. And our tentative topic is the importance of local journalism. So we look forward to our next Coffee and Community and a panel discussion about that. Thanks again for everybody for coming.